company that's in Ladysmith. It's just a small company, but they do a great job and it's cheap. So we had A&W for lunch.
Cameras live.
Thank you. Good afternoon, fellow directors, those watching at home, staff. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge our gathering this afternoon on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people. And I would like to reaffirm that this is not a recording or a continuation of the last meeting. This is a separate meeting of corporate services. Welcome. Ms. Legault.
The first item is the approval of the agenda.
So moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Next.
Item M1 is the adoption of the minutes of the Corporate Services Committee meeting of October 14th, 2020.
I see a mover and a seconder. Any discussion on those minutes, errors or omissions? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you. Ms. Legault.
Item M2 is the adoption of the Special Corporate Services Committee meeting minutes of November 12th, 2020.
And again, moved, seconded. Discussion on those, errors or omissions? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries as well. Any business arising, Ms. Legault?
No business arising.
Thank you.
There are some submissions for public input period.
Okay.
The first item is from Susan Kaufman. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I'd like to provide input on UB1 item 3. Given that this item was put over from the October 28th, 2020 meeting, it is hoped that any public input submissions from that date would have been sent to the directors for this meeting. These are words contained in the latest provincial communications to local governments for open meetings. Best efforts, procedural fairness, open and transparent and accountable to the public, increase accessibility through email, online submission form, phone or written letter, consider technology for enabling the public to be present by electronic means, by video conference or real-time question and answers. And then she quotes the recommendation from the staff report that public input period submissions for virtual meetings be forwarded to directors half hour prior to the meeting start time, with the chair providing a verbal summary of input received for the meeting. Mr. Chair, I submit that this committee, one, cannot reconcile the proposed recommendation is in keeping with the intent of the provincial government to keep the public as active participants in open meetings. However, you can choose to make a positive decision today to employ best efforts to follow the guidelines and broaden the ways in which the public can participate, not take away. And finally, to allow for a 10-minute recess before the commencement of question period is a goodwill gesture when asking for a half hour prior for public input. The next submission is from Cliff Evans. Item UB1, review of electronic meetings. 1, the board should reduce the number of CVRD meetings in one day. I find that after 8 straight hours of meetings, decisions are made with strained directors. 2, electronic meetings should be open to the public and hearings shouldn't be waived just because of the COVID crisis. 3, public input should be submitted to the meetings well in advance, but last-minute thoughts should not be refused. 4, public input shouldn't be summarized and read by the chair. It should be part of the public record. 5, a break before question period would give the public a chance to get questions in. And 6, known controversial subjects should not be left to the last article in the agenda so the public can ask questions. Your consideration and action would be much appreciated. And the third and final submission is from Bernard Yearlink regarding item UB1. Dear Chair, as long as the meetings are via WebEx, public input should be read out as has been done over the last while. Having the public input summarized by the chair creates an opportunity for censorship or what may be perceived as censorship. And that concludes public input period.
Thank you very much for your public input. Appreciate those comments. Moving on, Ms. Legault.
On to reports. Item R1 is a report from the Legislative Services Division regarding Delegation Bylaw 4361. And the proposed recommendation is that it be recommended to the board that CVRD bylaw number 4361, Regional District Delegation bylaw 2021, be forwarded to the board for consideration of first, second, and third readings.
Do I have a mover on that to get it on the floor? Moved by Director Morrison. Seconder? Moved and seconded. Director Morrison, you wish to speak to that?
Yeah, if I could, through you, Mr. Chair, to staff, and I'm not sure which staff it would be, but I don't know why this one really stuck out like a sore thumb for me, in that I get a sense that it's a very important process piece for staff and for ensuring proper authorities are bestowed upon the correct people and the processes are being followed. But it seemed, I guess my question is this, is there a timeliness to this issue being addressed like as of right now or before the end of the year, or because it just seemed like a little bit out of left field for me, and it's obviously a weightier thing than than it appeared when I first read it. So any comments from staff? Is this something that we need to do right now?
This is the first opportunity that you've really had to look at it and review it, so it's open for the committee's discussion at this time. I mean, obviously, from my perspective, I would like to see it move forward to formalize some of our processes. But having said that, the bylaw wouldn't come forward before January anyway for actual readings. So if there is further discussion that's required, that's certainly up to the committee.
And Mr. Chair, if I can, this has been in the works for quite some time. Ms. Legault and the senior management team have been working on this, so this is not something that we've just put together just recently. This has been a long process and something that we do need to get tidied up.
I saw Director Marsh next, and then Director Wilson.
Well, it just kind of tickled my funny bone that people are concerned when you read the background and it talks about that it helps the district business be carried out in an efficient and effective manner. And I would just say that I fully support this. I think this is the way most municipalities and cities and regional districts carry on their business. And there's still significant amount of responsibility for directors or councillors.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Director Wilson, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I recall the senior staff did have some signing ability and there were limits set on that. Are these limits greater than what they were before, or are they the same as what they were before? They seem to be a lot higher, and perhaps I'm wrong there.
I'm going to let Ms. Legault speak to that.
Okay, Ms. Legault.
No, I think the limits for procurement and entering into contracts for goods and services are pretty much in line with what is in the existing procurement policy. But under the Local Government Act, that delegation should be by bylaw, not by policy. The policy can support the bylaw, but it's important to have the bylaw framework in place.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further, Director Salmon?
Yeah, thank you. So I think it was a good point about what other regional districts might do or other local governments. I'm just not familiar enough, but so I take it this is a new delegation bylaw, and yet I seem to recall we had a delegation bylaw that updated a few years ago that had to do with who reported to the board. That aspect, is that ringing any bells? Is that a separate, called something different, or?
You may be referring to the development side of the house, where there is a planning procedures bylaw that contains some delegated authority.
No, This was one where previously hiring and firing the top, say, 5 officers was the responsibility of the board, and that was all delegated. That we retired the CAO, and that all everything under that was up to the CAO.
There is a
That's how that was
separate bylaw that delegates authority for managing staff to the CAO. That's separate from this bylaw.
Okay, what's that called?
I don't have the bylaw citation at hand right now, but I could get that.
And Mr. Chair, may also be referencing the officer bylaw, which we also have, which designates the 3 officers of the corporation.
Okay, follow up?
Follow up, yeah.
Absolutely.
So what I think may be helpful, like if we've gotten by without this in the past, maybe just a bit of background, including is this best practice now? Most regional districts now have such a thing, and a little more of the context that would help us further to what Director Morrison said at the beginning.
Do you want to take that, Ms. Legault, or do you want me to respond to that?
It's a legislative requirement.
Yeah. Every local government must have a delegation bylaw, and it provides you the structure within your organization to delegate authority to staff. This is a very consistent bylaw. With all of my past employment, I've not had a regional district or a municipality without one. What we did do, changes to this, we brought the procurement policy delegations into this bylaw to protect the board and to protect staff, to ensure that it's all contained within a bylaw. I can assure you there's nothing in this bylaw that is out of the ordinary or extraordinary in terms of the powers that it's granted to its staff.
Thank you very much. Hope that clarifies. I have a speakers list. So this is basically to move it from the policy aspect that it currently resides into a legal bylaw portion, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. I have Director Sebring. Can I see the other hands? Director Nicholson. Anyone else? Director Sebring, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And what you say raises, what you said combined with what we just heard from the CAO raises a question for me. If every local government has to have a delegation of authority bylaw, we've been doing it under policy to this point. We've been breaking the law. Is that why there's the urgency here? I'm surprised, frankly, to see this come forward if there's no major changes in the allocations and the amounts and all the rest of it. How have we been doing it before? Have we been sort of ultra vires here? I guess that's the
Ms. Legault, I mean, as the corporate officer, Angie's got a perspective on that. I'll let you go first, Angie.
I think a lot of it has been managed by policy in the past, and you know, as sometimes happens when there are new staff looking at things with different eyes, this is a gap that was identified that needed to be filled.
So currently, just for clarity, right now we do not have a delegation of authority bylaw in the CVRD.
No, that's correct.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
But there, with clarity though, there are different delegations through different bylaws. And what Angie has done, Ms. Legault has done when she came to the regional district, saw that deficiency, that we needed to have a more formal delegation bylaw to deal with some things that were currently being dealt with in policy. And so what we were basically doing is, this is best practice. You've now got a comprehensive delegation bylaw under one document, with the exception of the land use delegation, which still resides in that policy. So,
well, for what it's worth, I'm surprised we didn't have it. We need it. Let's get this done. And if there's no change, if staff assures us there's no changes in terms of authorization or limits or any of that stuff, let's get it done yesterday. That's my only take. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sebring. You are breaking up again, so obviously that technical advice was moot. Director Nicholson.
Hand movement.
I read this over and I'm comfortable with it and would like to move it, but I would like also to ask first a question of Ms. Legault. With your new eyes, do you see anything in this that is maybe not best practice relative to your other experience with other local governments? Is there any way we can improve it, our policy?
I think that we've reviewed this draft bylaw with the senior management team a couple of times, and there are other areas of delegation that will be coming forward through the Land Use Services Department. That would be a complement to this bylaw, but at this time, I think this is what the regional district needs.
Follow up?
Can I move this recommendation?
Most certainly can at any time. Moved and seconded by Director Stone. I'll return to my list. I have Director Salmon, then Director Marsh.
Fine, thanks.
Director Marsh.
Yeah, I don't think I need to add anything that I didn't say a little while ago.
Okay, looking around. Any further hands on this one? Are you ready for the question? Oh, Director Smith, just stretching. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And we'll note that Ms. Director Toporowski is having some technical difficulty, so she's not able to vote. Next, Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R2, report from the Finance Division on the Provincial COVID-19 Safe Restart Grant for local governments. And the recommendation for consideration is that it be recommended to the board on December 9th, 2020, that the CVRD's COVID-19 Safe Restart Grant for local governments be utilized for COVID-related refunds and expenses to December 31st, 2020, with any remaining funds held in a reserve for 2021.
Thank you very much. Director Marsh.
I would just like to move that, please.
Moved and seconded. With your indulgence, I would just like to direct a question to our CAO. I did watch the EASC meeting on this discussion. I know the province sent the memo on the COVID-19 and what it can be utilized for. I think there was further information to come from the province on what exactly some of those points may be. Has there been any further correspondence with the province on the funds allocations?
So, Mr. Chair, I don't believe, unless finance has got some more detailed breakdown of those criteria that the province provided, that's what we've based this report on. I do have some other information. I know that there were some questions around the allocation of funds provincially between regional districts and municipalities. But with respect to this report, the guidelines are what you have in the letter that was addressed to me.
Thank you. I have Director Morrison, Stone, and Salmon. Did I see your name or hand up? Director Morrison.
I'd be more than willing to yield until we've heard from our chair.
Director Stone.
It was just a couple of points. One is obviously I think we all recognize, especially in the CVRD being a kind of a unique regional district, that there are some inequities, either perceived or realistic, in terms of the level of funding that went to municipalities, in particular smaller municipalities. I think the representative from Lake Cowichan, as well as myself, recognized that we felt that the funding from the province was more than sufficient. I think in this report, it does reflect on the fact that these are to be COVID sort of support funds. And we did hear earlier today that more funding is coming for the regional district for transit. But at the same time, I think that the uniqueness of the CVRD points out some of those challenges, in that we have a very developed south end of the region that are still electoral areas. And had they been municipalities, I think it's quite recognized that there would be millions of dollars flowing into the south end communities if they were municipal governments. I would be happy to, first of all, I have spoken with the new Minister of Municipal Affairs just at a very high level. And we do have a call on Monday with the minister to discuss some of these issues, and I will be bringing this up on that call. Just flagging that all regional districts, just like all municipalities, are not the same, and sometimes the same funding formulas don't work when you look through that lens, or don't seem as equitable. So I would be supportive of a letter to the minister from the board that reflects that there are some challenges in that formula. We may want to spend a little bit of time with staff, have a discussion with the minister and her staff, and then reflect on how we do that and bring that letter back to the board for review, because I think we don't quite understand the thought behind some of the formulas that were developed. So if the committee felt it appropriate for the chair to write a letter, I would support that. But I would recommend that we bring it back in January to review as a group, with a little bit more information from the minister and her staff. And also I will be bringing it up on the call on Monday. And just a final reflection on the discussion and the information I reviewed that started the discussion at EAS. I felt there was moments where it felt a little inflammatory, and I got defensive as a municipal representative. But when you read between the lines, I think what I'm trying to express is the reality that, especially with a regional district like the CVRD that is more suburbanized than rural in many ways, that there's some opportunity for a second look at how we may get that funding, but also recognizing that we've heard since that time about this additional transit funding. So I'm not sure that the support funds are completely exhausted for the regional district at this point. And the final point I will make is that although there is definitely a higher portion of funding available to the electoral areas based on a per capita basis, that a lot of the funding the region did receive was based on municipal populations as well. The $3.10 per person included all the municipal populations as well. And the municipal populations do make up the vast majority of population within the region. So whatever the committee decides to do in terms of engaging with the province on the issue, I'll support that, and I'll do that as chair. But I just want to let those know that although it may seem that the municipalities are flush with cash, I can speak on behalf of our municipal mayors that we're also struggling with how we make those funds that have been provided to us last through the next year, much as staff has done in this report. So I'll turn it over to the committee at that, and just know that whatever you all decide, I'll represent the region moving forward and speak up for the electoral area directors.
Thank you very much, Director Stone. I think if nothing else, it shows the discrepancies between regional districts throughout the province, and that one funding formula does not work for all regional districts. When you look at the population of the Cowichan Valley Regional District at over 80,000, and then look at the Caribou, Interior, and other regional districts that are very sparsely populated, that perhaps the urban ones should have been treated similar to a municipal formula. Any other speakers? Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's a great idea to write a letter to the...
Before you start, Director Wilson, you cannot have any of my funds.
That was my next sentence. Your funds are safe, guys. Don't worry about it. But I think it's a great idea that we write a letter about it. But no, your funds are safe.
No, I appreciate that. I just had to get that in there. Sorry. A little bit of levity. And I do like your new tooth. Any further discussion? Yes, Director Morrison.
Glad that we've heard from our chair on this and fully endorse a letter being written, and glad that the temperature has come down on some of the rhetoric from some of the other areas, and I would just wonder if it would be appropriate to have the discussions that the chair is going to have and the letters be written before we actually act on the resolution. I wouldn't want to be in a position where we act on this resolution that I don't know if it's on the floor already or not, but and that being deemed accepting of the level of funding that we're getting. And so I would perhaps even make a resolution that this be referred to an upcoming corporate services meeting, and that the board chair be encouraged to write a letter and have those discussions.
Okay, it was moved and seconded, but now it has been referred. So on the propriety of referral, Director Stone.
Sorry, I missed that there. There was a second to refer that to what?
The next corporate services meeting.
Okay, well, to speak to that, I will just say that I don't believe that a resolution will be forthcoming before then, but if that's what the committee decides, that's fine. I think that's a separate issue from what staff are recommending here, but if the committee supports the referral, I will of course make best efforts either way, but I wouldn't expect that to result in amended formula or amended funding coming to the regional district between now and the next meeting.
Ms. Weiner?
I just wanted to mention that as we're moving into year end, these expenditures, if they were going to go back to the functions, would need to be done in January, February. We're closing off the books, and then we would be unable to allocate those funds back after the budget has been closed. So that was part of the reason the report spoke to going to the board tonight.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. I saw Director Staples.
No, I just, given that we have that meeting on Monday with the Minister of Municipal Affairs, I was just supporting the referral to hear what else, if there's anything else that's coming forward, and to allow time for that discussion before something is sent.
Thank you very much, Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just need some clarity from staff on the propriety of the referral. I heard Ms. Weiner say that if we put this off to the next Corporate Services Committee, which I believe is January 13th, I could be wrong on that, somebody can correct me, that might be a little bit late in the game in terms of allocating the funds here. And that has to be done, fairly quickly, which is why I was going to go to the board tonight. If this motion puts that in jeopardy, then I would not be in support of referral. I see Mr. Carruthers raised his hand.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think we might be mixing up two issues. I think the allocation of these funds is a separate issue. I think the further work with the ministry around the allocation of grant funding to the regional district is a different discussion. And so I would recommend that you, if you're so inclined, for the reasons that Ms. Weiner explained, that you pass the resolution to allocate the funds at this point in time, and that the other matter come forward to the future corporate services with regard to talking to the ministry about future allocations. If something was to change moving forward, you're only going to get more money, not less. So at least we can allocate these funds out and tidy up our books before the end of the year.
What I heard Director Morrison say was approving the motion that's recommended here, that we take this to the board and hand it off to staff and say allocate it out. That in effect is an acceptance of what the government has given us, when the purpose of authorizing Chair Stone to write the letter and do some lobbying with the minister is to get more money. And if indeed the recommended resolution in the report is an acceptance of what's there and makes it a fait accompli, then it becomes the question of why bother authorizing Chair Stone to move forward with this, because we've accepted it. It's a done deal. That's kind of what I'm trying to wrap my head around. But at the end of the day, if referring this to the next corporate services in January is going to create problems with allocating these funds and expenses to the current year's COVID-related stuff, then I don't think we can pass the motion to refer. So thank you.
If I can, Mr. Chair, I think we've already received the money, Ms. Weiner. I believe it's been deposited into our account. We've already received the money. It might be a symbolic gesture to not pass a resolution to allocate it, but I don't know how much I don't know that the province would be impacted by that decision. We've accepted the money, we have it, and we need now to decide how to allocate it out. I would honestly say I don't see that there would be much opportunity to see that formula changed at this point in time. But the mayors and chair may have some different information coming back from the minister after Monday. But we do have a timing issue with regard to our books and in regard to allocating these funds out to the various functions.
Director Acton, Director Marsh, and then Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I just had a question about in the report, it said that for the refunds for programs and events, it does not include take into account lost revenue at any CVRD facilities. So is that something the province had decided, or where does that come about? Because that to me would be one of the main areas where we would want to get reimbursement.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Are we on propriety of referral or on the main motion?
I believe you are correct. I think we were speaking to the propriety of referral. So if you save that
I'll save
point.
it. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for the clarity, Director Sebring. Policy police. Director Morrison, please.
I was just going to withdraw my motion with the support of the seconder in regards to referring to next year.
Okay, the seconder is okay with that. And is that appropriate, Ms. Legault? I certainly don't want to overstep the bounds. Or do we defeat it?
Normally you would vote to defeat it, but I'll leave it in your capable hands.
I think I will call the vote just so that we are doing this appropriately. All those in favor of referral? And those opposed? That motion is defeated. Thank you very much. Now moving forward to the original motion. You may speak to that, Director Acton, if you wish to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was just to the questioning why lost revenues for recreation centers or any CVRD facilities is not considered, where that would be a large percentage for the electoral areas that we would have lost funding there.
Through the chair to
sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. Through the chair to Director Acton, the reason why we didn't allocate for lost revenue at this point in time, we took the amount for the refunds that people had paid for programs, but we didn't net it out with the expenses that normally would have incurred for those programs. So those functions will get the full amount of refunds that they had to pay out back as cash flow. And then as we go through the year, depending on what is needed for, say, restart, reception centers, those type of things, it can be looked at the end of the process without whatever's left in the reserve for revenue losses.
And maybe if I can, Mr. Chair, for clarity, we may have lost revenue, but we also significantly reduced our expenditures. We subsidize our recreation, obviously, and so by having our facilities shut down, we also didn't incur expenses. So that nets out.
Thank you. Follow up, Director Acton? You're okay? Okay, Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I'd like some clarity around the services for vulnerable persons. So I'm not clear on, I know that there was a lot of work done to try and house the homeless during the COVID, and I'm wondering how that has been funded and whether any of this money should be going to that.
Let Ms. Weiner take that.
Okay. Yeah, none of the funds for this has been allocated for the vulnerable population. There was funding that was received from the FCM program, and that funding was 100% and it flowed through to the Couch and Housing Association. And we've done the grant funding on that. So that was a separate stream of funding that's been used so far for that population.
And further to that, Mr. Chair, during the initial response to the Regional Emergency Operations Center, much of the funding was refunded by Emergency Management BC through our task number as well for some of the activities that were undertaken either through BC Housing or EMBC.
Excellent. Thanks for that clarity. I was going to mention BC Housing. I have Director Yanni DiNardo next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to move the recommendation.
It's been moved and seconded. I still have Director Marsh on my speakers list.
Actually, I went like this, but now that I've heard Director Nicholson, I'm wondering if it wouldn't be worth speaking to John Horn and seeing if any of this money would be useful. It looks like it's going to be a long, cold, lonely winter, as they used to sing. And I know the Ramada Inn is a very good option, but it's full. And there may be some other places that they could use the money, including augmenting rents, as earlier a director mentioned how much groceries are going up and that kind of thing. So it got me thinking, gee, maybe we should give this some more thought. But before she said that, I was prepared to vote yes. And now I'm wondering what other people think about the idea of checking in with Cowichan Housing Association and seeing, if it would be helpful to top them up, even if it's only $50,000 of it.
Thank you very much. I know there is some things in the works, and I'm going to skip you, Director Morrison, just for a moment and go to Director Staples for some clarity on some of those questions, perhaps.
Yeah, so from the task force, the COVID Emergency Cowichan Vulnerable Task Force, I don't remember the full name. It's a long name the government gave to the task force. But at this time, there may be need for some additional funds. It sounds like it would be more around the need for warming stations and also extreme weather shelters, which are the ones that are opened only when it goes below a certain temperature or when there's heavy rains. So I think they're still trying to sort out funds for that, for those through the different, whether it's BC Housing or existing contracts that people have. They're still trying to sort that out. So there may be a need. At this time, I don't know what that need would be, but it may be worth having the conversation if that's something that the board is interested in entertaining, to find out what that might be. And I believe that they should have a pretty good idea of that by next Monday, based on other places that the funding is coming from through the federal government allocations through, I believe, it would be through possibly the United Way, that they're trying to sort out where the rest of those funds go now. So that's as much as I can do to update, but there may be a need, and I don't believe it would be for a huge amount based on what I've been hearing, but John Horn would be the one to answer that.
Great. Thank you, Director Staples. I know there is work in the background, and that working group does a great job. I miss it now that I'm not on it. I have Director Morrison, Martian, Director Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess this would be through to Ms. Weiner. So I'm just looking at the list of eligible costs, and I guess what I'm trying to figure out, you've got a list of expenditures that can be covered by this or eligible costs. Where I'm interested in is my area of inquiry is in those sometimes joint and sometimes not electoral area versus regional or sub-regional, and that we've got a facility like the Shawnigan Lake Community Center, which is wholly a Area B function. Then in our electoral area, or in the west, we've got the Cowichan Lake Sports Arena and the associated facilities, which are FI in the town. And are we assessing costs and eligible expenses for those sub-regional ones, and then just separating out electoral area versus municipal costs, because they've been allocated? So you're shaking your head no. So I'm just wondering how we're going to rationalize what are eligible expenses borne individually, or whether it makes any difference that they're separated out versus a regional, sub-regional, or electoral area.
Ms. Weiner?
Through the chair to Director Morrison, these funds are meant to be for the region and the regionally provided funds, and the distribution of it is meant to be distributed by the board, so there has not been. As the expenses are directly related for things like sanitizers, the computer programs for being able to even hold these WebEx meetings, those have all been included in these costs.
Follow up, Director Morrison, or?
I got to think about that for a minute. Please go to the next.
Okay, and that's not to say that that sub-regional function perhaps could not utilize some of the town of Lake Cowichan's COVID-19 restart funding as well. As a shared entity, there could be a possible opportunity for that as well. I'm not speaking for my council because that has not been decided, but because it is a sub-regional portion, and these funds were set for regional entities, I think that's where the problem is. It lies between the sub-regional entity that the West End has with all the community halls and the recreation facilities. So problematic as it is, I'm sure it'll work its way out. Director Marsh.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Carruthers. So if we were to pass this now, technically the 300,000 you would put in reserve for expenses that would begin in about 3 weeks, maybe a little less. If the Cowichan housing needed some of those, there would be nothing stopping us from having that discussion at that time and deciding on if we wanted to give them some money. I don't know where you went. Oh, there you are. And how much? Am I correct?
Yeah, through the chair, Director Marsh, yes, that's true. I mean, we've got existing expenditures that we've made that the first allotment would reimburse for. We'd put the balance in the reserve, and the board can decide at any time how it chooses to expend those $300,000 in reserves. We do anticipate that we're going to have additional costs associated with COVID-19 moving forward. We're going to be in this pandemic at least until the spring or summer, so we thought it was prudent to keep those funds aside for future PPE and other costs that we may incur.
So one last question, and then I'd like to move a motion if we don't have one moved. If we pass this tonight, that also doesn't preclude Chair Stone from talking to Minister Osborne and seeing if there's a way of getting more. Correct?
Not in my opinion, no.
Okay, so I'd like to move the recommendation that it be recommended to the board on December 9th that the CVRD's COVID-19 Safe Restart Grant for local governments be utilized for COVID-related refunds and expenses to December 31st, 2020, with any remaining funds held in a reserve for 2021.
Thank you very much. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it has been moved and seconded already, but I appreciate
it. I wish somebody'd stop me.
Oh, no, all good. Director Smith, I have you next, but thanks for reiterating that support.
Yes, I think that Mr. Carruthers has brought forward some very valid points for 2021. Those are unknown costs at this time, and I think that having the additional 300,000, I know our allotment for regional district is minimal compared to the municipalities, and they have opportunities to also fund the homelessness and some of those areas. And I think that we, as the regional district, will see many costs coming forward in the new year. And I support the remaining 300 being allocated when we have an opportunity to see those costs in the spring. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ready for the question, ladies and gentlemen? I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you very much. Let's see, Director Oprowski joined us again. Thank you. Director Stone.
I just wanted to let the committee know that I'll have a conversation with the minister and report back via email, just so that you're aware, without the necessity for a letter until we hear what's coming forward. So that's up to the committee whether they want to direct me to write a letter, but the minister said that they'll have more information for me to report back to the committee and the board early next week.
Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Chair Stone, could you also mention the inequitable ways that the SERP funding was allocated, or grant opportunities were allocated as well? Municipalities were allowed to put in 2 applications each, and then the regional district was only allowed to put in 2. So, opportunities like that like you said, we have larger electoral areas here, so perhaps you could bring that up as well. So that moving forward, we're not restricted like that.
Director Stone.
Yeah, I actually have brought up that issue previously, and the answer from the previous minister was that there's no accounting for the edge cases, if you will, and that, most communities of those sizes would largely be municipalities. But I can bring it up with the new minister and see their input. But I know that those decisions were made in collaboration with the federal government. So those weren't just provincial decisions in terms of the application parameters for SARA. But I'll follow up with the minister on that as well.
Thank you very much.
Can we call the question?
We did.
Oh, we voted. God, I must be half asleep.
You better check your battery. Not on your computer. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. R3, report from Facilities and Transit Division regarding a proposed amendment to the direct current fast charge electric vehicle charging station agreement between the CVRD and BC Hydro. And the proposed recommendation is that it be recommended to the board on December 9th, 2020, that the proposed DCFC amendment agreement with BC Hydro as described in the staff report to the December 9th Corporate Services Committee be approved.
I see Mr. Wakeham. Would you like to speak to this first, or shall you wait for questions?
Mr. Chair, I think I'll just wait for questions. It's pretty straightforward, I think.
Yeah, okay. Director Yanni DiNardo, were you moving that? Do I have a seconder? And questions? Director Smith. Or was that a delayed second? Okay. Is there any questions or comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Well, thanks for showing up, Mr. Wakeham. Anyway.
Thank you.
Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item R4, report from Finance Division on the CVRD investment portfolio for information.
Director Acton.
I have a question and possibly a comment. So I don't know if it was me not being able to find it in the report, but how much money do we invest? Is this talking about?
Currently, the CVRD has in these investments $50.7 million. And that covers for all functions and the operating capital reserves, as well as funds that have not been expended once the requisition comes in.
Follow up?
Yeah, thank you. So I knew it was going to be some large amount. I guess I wonder, like, why don't we borrow from ourselves and make our own interest and especially when we're borrowing for saving for later, and like, why aren't we making that interest to ourselves? And then second question would be, well, if there's $50 million essentially in the bank, because these aren't risky investments, why can't we borrow on future funds that we know is coming, such as gas tax?
Ms. Weiner.
Through the chair to Director Acton, it's a little more complicated in a regional district because if any function ever needs their money, I have to ensure that the funds are available. We do some internal borrowing, which is for revenue anticipation. We haven't borrowed for the last 2 years for funds waiting until we have the requisition coming in. We've been borrowing internally on that. And we have done a couple of cases where before we went out to long-term borrowing, because it was such a short time frame, there was no sense in just going out for short-term borrowing. We just went straight, borrowed from internally and repaid the function at the borrowing rate. But going forward, you also, if you were going into say long-term commitments, the regional district could only do it for a maximum of 5 years because that's a short-term borrowing allowance within the legislation.
Yes, Director Acton, final follow-up.
Okay, final follow-up.
For now.
So essentially you're saying we can and we do sometimes. So can we put a set amount that we could do that? Because, banks do it for themselves. And to me, it seems like we should be, especially if it's a short, I'm not saying long-term, I'm saying I'm more interested in the short term and not losing the interest or the opportunities.
Ms. Weiner?
Through the chair to Director Acton, well, I really appreciate what you're trying to achieve. And yes, it would be nice to be able to put a pot of money aside, but that would be taking from all functions, putting money aside. And those taxpayers for each different area have paid for a different pot of money. So when we do the internal borrowing, it comes from one reserve fund, technically usually. And it would and we repay the one reserve fund, depending on that function needed the funds.
I'll come back to you, Director Acton, if you have a follow-up. I have Director Marsh. Did I miss anyone else?
Yes, I'd like to ask you, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, through you to Ms. Weiner. I noticed the Scotiabank investment, and I just wonder, most of the profits for the big banks go way back east to a bunch of rich people. And I'm just wondering, have you checked recently with that kind of money, whether local credit unions would give you comparable interest rates and terms?
Yeah, when I went out to do checks with the local credit unions, there was more of the regional district would have to secure the funds and lock it in for a time frame where I have the flexibility at better rates to be able to take the funds at any point in time with the Scotiabank, which is the reason I stayed with that.
Thank you.
Director Salmon, please.
Yeah, thank you. So just following on, so interest rates, it just what roughly looks like we're still getting very good rates on our short-term money here. Those are accurate, 0.96. What do we pay when we borrow roughly from MFA?
I think the last time I looked at it was around 1.46%.
Okay, I heard one of the big banks this week at a mortgage under 0.9%. So it's remarkable if we're getting 0.96 or anything like it on our savings.
Good point.
Just
sorry, follow up.
Just curious, that Scotia RES fund, what does that mean? RES?
That is a separate account we have just for the reserve funds.
Reserve, okay. Thank you.
Perfect. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is the resolution been moved and seconded?
You know what? I can't remember.
Well, I'd move it and speak to it very briefly.
Okay, moved and seconded. So now it has been?
The report's for information.
Oh, it is. Okay.
For information.
Just very briefly, our finance people are really sharp and have looked at this, know our MFA, and quite frankly, MFA has a been to a couple of their AGMs, and they've got some really smart people in the right places that do a great job for us, and our staff are right on top of it. Ms. Wayner and I have had a couple of discussions. I've got a bit of background in this, and I think they're doing a spectacular job in both the borrowing and the investing on our behalf. And this is something that I want to tip my hat and say you're doing a great job, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Very nicely said. Anything further? Yeah, virtual clap. Okay, this was just for information, so Ms. Legault, if that's all for this one, moving on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On to unfinished business. UB1 is a staff report from the Legislative Services Division on review of electronic meetings, and the recommendation on public input period has been referred to today's meeting for further discussion from the October 28th regular board meeting.
Director Stone.
So I'm going to try and cut this off as early as I can. I think we have enough experience with the digital platforms. We've done public hearings. I believe that we could try and get back to a public input period that was as similar and as controllable as we had before we went to electronic meetings. So I would say that as awkward or as often as I may sit here and listen to public input and agree or disagree with what's being submitted, I'm not in favor of limiting it in any further way than it's limited right now. I'm fine to go the way that we are, but I would also support and actually think it would be better if we were able to support a 15-minute public input period at the start of a meeting, just like we did when we were in person, in some electronic way that allowed the chair to have the same level of control and interaction with the public input session as we did in an in-person meeting. I think that's achievable. I can't speak for the committee chairs on their comfort level, but my experience has been that since we've gone to electronic meetings, the public input has found less focus and is less restricted in content than that which would be provided in person. So I would rather that we look at facilitating the ability to somebody connect electronically and provide their public input for 15 minutes at the start of each committee or board meeting, and in the interim that we keep things the way that they are. So that's just my view on it. We can work in January with staff on a way that we may be able to better support sort of live public input that more closely resembles what we would do if we were at in-person meetings. But I'm not in favor of limiting it any further. I would rather go ahead with the way that we've been going than trying to come up with limits and chairs editorializing comments or summarizing comments. I'd rather just have them delivered to us in their entirety, and we can take them as we wish.
Thank you very much. Director Sebring is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was a bit of a surprising position from the board chair. If you want to go that way, I wouldn't have any objection. This recommendation that's before us, I can't support it the way it is. The 30-minute notice for us to read public input. What we've done at North Cowichan is we've said, if you want public input, our meetings are on Wednesdays at 1:30. Get your public input into us by 5 p.m. on the day before the meeting. That way, and all of council gets to see it, we all get to read it, and it gets read out at the meeting, and there it is. Anything after 5 p.m., that's your deadline, because, we have some council members who've said, I need time to digest this stuff, and so I wasn't in favor of the 30-minute piece, but I'm prepared to live with the present system if the intent is to move forward and find a way to do it with live input, either on the phone or, I know WebEx has a platform, and we've been using it for our budget meetings. I forget what it's called. It's a slightly different version of WebEx, which doesn't, it's awkward in some ways because it doesn't allow, for example, there's no lobby, so we can't move people out to the lobby if they're potentially in a conflict of interest. So it doesn't work well for meetings, but it's worked well for our committee of the whole in budget. So, that might be something to look at. I'm sure staff can work something out. But if the goal is to say, let's return to 15 minutes of live public input limited to, 3 minutes per person, 5 people, and then by resolution of the board, if we want to extend it, we extend it or whatever, just like we used to do, I would have no objection to that. But that's a whole different way of doing it than what we have been doing. And what's being recommended in the staff report was not a direction that I was prepared to go. But if Chair Stone wants to head in that other direction in terms of live public input, I'd be all over that. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Director Sebring. I have Director Nicholson next.
Thank you. I think it's really important that we move towards a system very quickly that allows people to provide input in person in our virtual meetings. But I also think we should retain an option for people to be able to write their submissions in, because I know that some people have challenges with access to computers and things. So I think that actually I would like to see that moved so that staff can get going on figuring out a way so it can start happening right in the new year. And I'd be willing to make a motion to that effect.
Are you seconding that, Director Stone, or you wish to speak to it? So are you moving that now, or would you?
I was going to suggest maybe more direct wording that staff report back to the committee in January on options for live public input via WebEx or another technological means, but whatever Director Nicholson wanted to make as a motion.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine with me. I'll second that.
So I guess, Director Stone, you did make a motion to send that to staff for appropriate live public input, whether it be video or other means. So speaking of the motion, it was moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Nicholson. Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you. I support the motion, and I do hope that if there isn't a way to do talking, that we don't have the input come to us half an hour before, because many of us are making our meals for these 12-hour days or taking our dog out for a walk or something. I certainly don't have a half an hour right before a meeting to digest the public input. But as I think Mayor Sebring said, we cut it off at 5 o'clock the night before so that we have the whole evening, and then we can still do whatever, those of us who had jobs or whatever on the day before the meeting. So if they would just consider that, I mean, as one of the options.
Thank you. I have Director Stone, then Director Morrison.
Yeah, and I've made my overarching thoughts on public input clear in the past, that I believe that more time in advance is more valuable than last minute before a meeting. But it's been made very clear over the many times we seem to have punted this issue down the road that there are members in our communities that feel that they really appreciate that in person or from my perspective, a last minute opportunity to get more input in. So I'm supportive of that. I don't think it's that consequential that we should get rid of it. But I would always say to the public who's watching, the more in advance you get us information, the better we can incorporate it into our decision making and the better decisions we'll make. Last minute before we go live into a meeting doesn't give us time to consider it in balance with all the information that we're provided. So that being said, I will also say that we were hoping to resume some sort of more involved or in-person meetings in January 2021. That's quite clear that won't happen. So I think that if we're able to come back and have a discussion in January 2021 on the options for providing appropriate live public input, that's a fair compromise based on where we are in terms of COVID. Sorry, my dog just went crazy. That being said, hopefully you would support this motion. We can have that discussion in January, and in the meantime, we can continue on how we have been with public input.
Thank you, Director Stone. Director Morrison, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, I agree with a lot of what what Director Stone has just said, and that I did a little tally of the amount of reading that I did in preparation for today's meetings, and it was over 3 days, and I think I was up to about 16 hours of reading. And it's even difficult to remember stuff that I started on Sunday reading. But so the sooner we have input in, the more time we have to read and incorporate that material. But in addition to that, I'm just curious to know what the other directors are thinking about. What satisfaction they're getting from the format that we're using now in the virtual meetings, and if anyone else is feeling the need that at our soonest opportunity we are able to go to an in-person format. It's been noted in the staff report that there are in-person format possibilities available to us and some costs associated with them. And I don't know if there are other jurisdictions. I'm led to believe there are other jurisdictions that are meeting in person, face to face, for the conducting of their people's business. So do we have any ideas as to other jurisdictions that are doing this, and what the likelihood is it, and even if it's important to the board to get back to in-person meeting?
Let's see if staff has an answer for that first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the latest public health orders, that's not an option. We could potentially look at that in the new year should those orders expire, but right now that's not an option.
That was my thought as well, that given the new orders, we have moved from in-person meetings in the town of Lake Cowichan to a Zoom platform, believe it or not. And I, for one, really appreciate in-person meetings where I can gauge body language. You can't gauge body language in a 2x2 square on a video screen, and just to get the feeling of input at in-person meetings. But when the time comes, I will embrace that as well and move forward with the current format we have. Director Stone, I think I saw your hand up again.
No, I was just remarking on the latest orders from the province did say no in-person attendance for the public. So, if we were to look at resuming, it would be a little bit of a technological challenge because we still would have to provide the streaming resources for the public to view. And knowing that the spacing requirements, we could probably squeeze everybody into the boardroom, but that would be level of comfort with the directors. Beyond that, going to another location like anticipated before we were where we are now with COVID, I think would require some investment, obviously, in like the theater space or something to be able to stream and then accommodate that public input while we're in person. So, again, I very much would love to be able to meet with everyone in person, but I think that based on where we're at, maybe that might need to be pushed out a little bit.
Thank you. And I think we all want to shake Mr. Martman's hand and congratulate him in person instead of virtually, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. Director Nicholson, please.
Well, it just reminded me on this point that I think that we should think about spreading our meetings out a little bit more, because I know it's challenging, these very, very long days and long meetings. And maybe if we could plan to schedule meetings over 2 days, it might work better.
Thank you. And that was actually discussed at the chair's meeting, wasn't it, Director Stone? But this is the format that we approved as a board, and here we go. Anything further on this? I, as chair, have a problem with providing a verbal summary of public input personally. I don't know that I could summarize what the intent of the true reader is without reading out the whole input portion. So I personally have a problem with that. I do like the idea of a short recess at the end of meetings to allow for questions to come in, as opposed to during the ongoing portion of the meeting. So I would like to see something like that personally, where we had a small, pause at the end where we can just stretch and wait for those questions to come in. It could be on the final item, for instance, of an agenda, when could be a contentious item or a very important item to some people that may not be able to afford them the opportunity to put that question in. I see Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I have real reservation about question period. The intent of it, I don't know, has stuck around from my understanding. I thought it was intended so that people could ask, oh, okay, now that the decision's made, where is this going to go next? And what it's become is just a platform to further someone's point, but the decision's already been made. And often it's a spot to reprimand us or lecture us on our behavior or what went on in the meeting. So I don't find that question period is really, there's nothing stopping anyone from contacting any director and asking them, what did you mean by that, your answer, or what happens next? And then to add another 10 minutes to our long meetings, I think is a little much. It originally was supposed to be replaced by question period at the beginning, but a few members of the public pushed really hard and the board got nervous about getting rid of question period at the end of the meeting. So we kept it. And now it's kind of morphed into something that's not productive, in my opinion. So I would love to see question period at the end just be gone. It's not meant to stump it's not stump the chair, or it just could be used much more productively for some, or not even have it at all. Thank you.
Thank you for your opinion. I think it's important that the people watching be afforded that opportunity, but that's just my opinion. Director Wilson?
Yeah, I respectfully disagree with Director Acton on this one. It's absolutely essential that we have public input and question period. We cannot stop that. We have to have what the people are thinking, and if it's seen as a way of forwarding something, well, so be it. But we cannot do away with these things at all.
Anything further on this? Director Nicholson?
Yeah, I agree. And I was going to propose a motion, if we need one, to make sure that we have a pause before the question period. I think it is problematic for people. I do think it is helpful that people write their questions down and email them in, because then we have a record. And I think we should be attempting to do a better job of getting back to people with answers when the chair is not able to answer them. And I think it would be, we should be tracking and providing the answers sort of publicly, or somehow making it clear to people that the questions are being answered. And I think that if we, I also don't understand why it is not, why we couldn't have, if staff are in the room and are able to answer a question, why they are not able to do that. Because this is not about putting people on the spot. They can certainly say that they would have to get, back to answer the question. But, if a question can be quickly and easily dealt with at the meeting, it seems to me that we would want to do that.
Thank you. Any further input? Yes, Director Bartman.
There, I think that works. Thank you, Chair. I guess I'm looking at the recommended resolution and I don't see the question period actually worded in there. Is that something that you would have to put in as well?
Yeah, I think that came from previous discussions on this topic. While we reside in a virtual realm, it currently does reside within the in-person board meetings, the question period at the very end. We're just trying to accommodate how to do that in the virtual reality that we currently reside in.
Yeah, I'm interested in if whether that's possible, because I can see it being possible in the beginning of a meeting, but then having the back end of a meeting after going through all the deliberations, whether you can actually feasibly have a public question period at the end through technology.
And I think that's perfect. And I think that's what Director Stone had mentioned, whether it be video or some virtual aspect of attending that at the beginning for the public input, and how we can implement that perhaps in the question period as well. Maybe a thought. I think it's an important part, but that's just me. I have Director Marsh next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also agree that it's an important part. Our experience at North Cowichan since going digital is we have usually one question, usually from the same individual, and usually some version of the same topic. So it's a little bit frustrating. But they're all, I can remember before I put my name forward to run, going to meetings to make my decision and having really legitimate questions. And I think that we need to have space for those people. So I do like the idea of, okay, now we're going to take a 10-minute break and come back. And I don't know what's the best way, if it should be the chair or the legislative services. But if there is a way that it could be done virtually, I would prefer that. But I just don't know if there is or not.
Thank you very much. Well, I don't think we've resolved much here today, but I don't want to punt it down the road any further, as Director Stone said.
Mr. Chair, there is a motion on the floor.
Okay, thank you.
And
Could you read it back to me, please?
The motion is for staff to report back in January on options for live public input.
Okay. On the motion, Director Marsh?
Just wondering if that also includes questions at the end.
It wasn't included in the original motion, but that's certainly a possible amendment.
So I'd like to amend that we add including a question period at the end.
You're seconding that, Director Nicholson? And further discussion? Okay, I'm going to test the table. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Okay, thank you. That moves forward.
Just a point of clarity, Mr. Chair. We're going to continue with the present process until we get that report back.
You can't hear.
Sorry, I turned my video off. Maybe that'll help. Just a point of clarity. We are going to continue with the present practice until we get that report back and decide what to do with it. I think we need to articulate that for folks who are watching, just so that they understand. At least that's my assumption, unless I'm incorrect.
Did I see your hand, Director Stone?
Well, yeah. Well, I was going to bring forward a point of order. We called the question on the amendment, so now we're talking about the question as amended, right?
Okay. Well then,
my understanding is until there's a motion that changes the current practice would continue. But
okay.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Anything further? I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you. That motion carries. Yes, Director Stone.
And I'll just, hopefully we don't have to debate it. We've already discussed it, but I would move that we take a 10-minute recess before question period to allow people an opportunity to get their questions in. And again, we can just, if there's a seconder, we can just hopefully just go straight to a vote and see how people feel about it.
I have a seconder. Can I go to the vote?
Can you say that again, please? There was some noise. Can you repeat that?
That there be a 10-minute recess after the meeting to allow for questions to be submitted.
No, after the last agenda item, but before adjournment. Yeah.
I can't go to the question. Director Acton.
Well, perhaps, do we have a service bylaw around this? What is the purpose of the question period? And like, how is it defined? Because our meetings are long enough, and then to come back and wait for 10 minutes and then we all have to listen to the question. What?
So, Mr. Chair, I do have, with your permission, I have the question period policy in front of me right now, and I think Director Acton is asking for the purpose statement. And as identified in the policy, the purposes of the question period is to provide public access to the board, committee, or commission regarding the business of the local government. The purpose of question period policy is to recognize the need for question period to proceed in a timely fashion.
Clarifies, I hope. Follow up?
So I guess I don't understand why giving somebody 10 minutes to write the question would fulfill that requirement when they can certainly send a question to the board at any time.
Oh, fair enough. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very sympathetic to a lot of what Director Acton is saying because, it's people want to have an opportunity to provide input to a committee or the board in advance of us making decisions. And in the time that I've sat in the chair, I've had a lot of questions posed to me, and they vary widely. Yet very few seem to rise to that, I wouldn't even say standard, but that intent of when question period was brought in, of what Director Acton spoke to earlier about a clarification of a process or the next steps in an application to that extent. So we will often have questions that are posed to the rationale for why a decision was made, which means that the chair has to, read the minds of the people sitting around the table. So, if we're wanting to answer questions of a serious nature posed to us by members of the public, and yet the reality is when we get to the end of a long meeting, all of us want to end that meeting. I know that when I end a days full of meetings, I go home, I don't go to sleep at night for hours because of what's involved. So I'm wondering if we can maybe ask for the cooperation of people that want to pose legitimate questions to us, that we put in our meeting procedure that in advance of the last item on the agenda, or the second last item on the agenda, that we put in a written reminder to the chair to make a call for questions. And if we have had a contentious item as the very last one, or maybe we ask the chairs when they're arranging the agenda that they don't have a contentious item as the last one or two, that we make the call, give people the opportunity, and then our staff can check for them prior to the end of the meeting. But I can tell you just by watching the screen as we get to the ends of meetings, people are just anxious to hit that leave meeting item and to move on and go home or wrap up for the day. So that's where I'd be more inclined to go, is to give plenty of notice that question period is coming up. For those people that have questions about items that have gone on the agenda, please submit them now. And you know what? If someone needs 10 or 15 minutes to compose a question, it's going to take probably 10 or 15 minutes of the question period to read it out and answer it. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. respectfully to Director Morrison, I would disagree. We do the 10-minute pause at the end of the meeting before adjournment at North Cowichan, and yeah, it extends the proceedings by 10 minutes, but any opportunity for input to me is a good opportunity for input. I really, like, for example, in this very meeting, the last item on the agenda is the next one, and that's the elected officials code of conduct policy. Now, I suspect we're not going to have a big long debate because we're going to kick it off to committee, but if we did, and the public wanted to have some input or had some questions about how does this thing play out, to just say, oh, there's no new business, question period, no questions, adjourned. You do that in 45 seconds when you wrap it up. That's not enough time for them to send an email. And with all due respect to Director Morrison, to say at the agenda setting meeting, we'll just make sure there's nothing controversial at the end. What's not controversial to me may be of great interest to somebody else if there's a question. It's very hard to determine what will or will not spark questions. It's only 10 minutes. I really don't have a problem with it, and I thank Director Stone for bringing this forward, and I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have a motion on the floor. No further speakers. I'm sorry, Director Nicholson, please.
No, I just have a quick question for Ms. Legault. Is there any specific requirement for us to hold question period under the Local Government Act or the Community Charter?
Not under the legislation. It's currently included in our board and committee commissions procedures bylaw that is included in the order of business on the agenda.
That answers, I'm sure. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? Director Acton, Director Morrison. That carries. And I believe Director Sebring may have jinxed us by saying that we're going to punt this next one off. The next one, Ms. Legault, is?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item UB2, Elected Officials Code of Conduct Policy for discussion.
Thank you very much. Director Wilson to start.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I tend to agree with Director Sebring. We should put this off because, as I understand it, we have a committee of which I'm a member, which is going to be discussing pay and code of conduct. So basically, I would respectfully ask that this one be punted off to that committee to bring back, because all we're going to be doing is discussing is what is in there right now and what changes have to be made. And the same thing will be discussed by the committee when it comes forward. So I would like to see this one preferred.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Director Stone. I think there was a referral here from a previous meeting is why it came here. But Director Stone, if you can clarify.
Yeah, again, it's under UB because it's unfinished business. However, we do have a committee that says in its mandate that the review of the code of conduct is part of its terms of reference. So I would refer this to the Director Services Code of Conduct, and there's another and after that, select committee. And it meets at the call of the chair, and I will look at scheduling and likely call that meeting though in February. Looking at the multi-day budget meetings that we already have scheduled in January, I don't think that we'll be able to put our minds to that kind of an in-depth discussion. I would be inviting some of submissions from other codes of conduct in the region. I know North Cowichan's done a lot of work with those. Director Sebring is the chair of that committee, so I would move the motion that we refer to the Directors Select Committee, and I'll look to call a meeting of that committee in the new year.
So Director Sebring is seconding that. Did I see your hand, Director Staples?
I'd just like to add that we can all take time to forward our thoughts and ideas to that committee as well between now and the time that meeting is called.
Very good, thank you. Anyone else? Director Marsh. You're muted, Director Marsh.
I've spent a lot of time reading it, and I'm quite satisfied with it. And I didn't know there was a committee that was supposed to do this, but it came before us, and I can bet you, I don't know, some kind of package of donuts or something, that if the committee goes over it and it comes back to us, we will have the same length of discussion as we would have tonight. So I think it's a good code of conduct, and I'd be prepared to vote on it tonight.
I think it already applies. I think we already have it, but this is just to look at if there's any needed amendments or additions within that committee. I have Director Morrison, and then I'll go to Director Stone.
Oh, if I may clarify, this seems a lot longer than the last one I saw, which was only 1 page. So maybe Mr. Carruthers could clarify.
No, that is your code of conduct.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you. Director Morrison, then Director Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I'm kind of, I try to pay attention, and I'm kind of at a loss as to this whole exercise here, because a great deal of effort was put in by staff and directors in creating this first iteration of this, and it was drafted. There were changes. A lot of effort went into this. Came forward, was adopted, and put in place, and it's in place now. And I'd love to have somebody explain to me what it is that this referral back to the committee is intended to do. I understand that some groups of some local governments have made it a part of the swearing in, and it's apparent that we haven't used it to a great extent at the board, but what's the intent of it going back for another round? Is it really that flawed that it needs a rework? I tend to agree with what Director Marsh has said.
Oh, thank you very much. I have Director Stone, then Director Wilson.
There was a question in that.
Because the committee passed a resolution to review it, and that's why it's on the agenda.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. I think it has been in our possession for over a year, if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Mohan. And to review after a year, I don't think is inappropriate. There may have been some items in there that we overlooked or may want to amend or add or subtract, I think is the view of coming forward. Director Wilson, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Stone has actually clarified this already, but as far as I remember as well, it was also brought up at that committee because of a letter which came in regarding Director Kuhn and myself, in which there was a request that this be reviewed because there were certain items that the writer thought were missing. So I think that was a part of it as well. But to be quite honest, I'm quite happy with it the way it is as well. But being part of the committee, I'm more than happy to look at it again.
Excellent. Any further input? So it's been moved to that existing committee. Director Nicholson?
I would just like, thank you. I'd just like to remind people of the letter that we received from Matt Price back in September. And he did provide some suggestions on how the code of conduct could be strengthened. And I also think that we are not very good at necessarily following the code of conduct. And I think maybe there's a discussion that needs to be had around how we can improve how we stick to it. So I would like to see it referred to the committee.
Thank you very much. And it is on the floor for referral to that committee. Are you ready for the question? All in favor? Those opposed? That motion carries. Thank you very much. Next, Ms. Legault.
There's no new business, so would be on to question period.
Thank you.
We have one submission at this point. Did you want me to proceed with that now?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. The submission is from Susan Kaufman. Mr. Chair, it's with great relief that the public hears that the directors are moving towards greater opportunities for the public to participate electronically in that recess or pause before question period. Thank you. First question, I'd ask that staff be able to consider submissions for the report. And second, I believe that question period is a legislated part of public meetings. Perhaps staff can confirm.
And I think that was confirmed earlier. It does not reside within the Local Government Act, but it does reside within our bylaws, our procedural bylaws, and that's where it would reside. As for public input on question period, I think that belongs with this group to make those decisions, but that's just my personal view. Thank you.
And there are no further submissions for question period.
No closed session, sorry. It's been a long day already. I thank you all for getting us through this. Mr. Legault, Mr. Carruthers, thank you very much. Staff, looking for a motion of adjournment. A whole bunch of people moved it, and a whole bunch of people second. Meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, fellow directors. We'll see you shortly.
Thank you, Tim.